Hello, good morning everybody. Oh, blimey, that's a bit loud, isn't it? Good, excellent. We've all woken you up this morning. And thanks very much for coming along to this exciting and packed session that we've got for the UKDA. My name is Simon Woodward. I'm the chairman of the UK District Energy Association. It's not mainly me you'll be listening to over this next session. You'll be listening to colleagues from DESNZ and also from Ofgem. But I'll give you a quick introduction to us and kick us off while we're waiting for people to come online and take their seats. So just a bit about us. We were formed in 2010. We were brought together by a number of local authorities who wanted a voice for heat networks in the UK. At the core of our membership are the full members. Those people own schemes, they develop schemes, they face the pain of investing in schemes, and around the outside are the very important associate members. And today we have over 160 members in the association. So it's the largest voice for heat networks in the UK. We're split roughly 50-50. 50% of people make things or advise on things. The other 50% are delivering them or owning them. Another benefit, each month we issue a monthly journal. That's 50 to 60 pages. It's basically what's going on in the world of heat networks. We also have our website. Please do look at that. We've got a page which shows what all the members are up to. We've also got things like our previous webinars and also our knowledge library. We've got over 500 documents in our knowledge library which you can access as a member. We also have members' meetings, contacts with DESNZ. You can see below there's a nice attestation there from Jodie Pittaway. Jodie heads up the Scottish and Southern Community Heat Networks business, and we're a well-respected voice to pass their message through to government. Benefit number 5, we have a number of working groups on different topics. We've got one going at the moment on the D&B supply chain. We've had them going on heat network zoning. We also respond to consultations, as many of you in the audience may have done. We've just responded to the heat network zoning consultation. Number 6, we run a number of online webinars. They're all on our YouTube channel. So if you want to pick up previous webinars, please go to our YouTube channel. A number of those are CPD certified. We quite like contentious topics. So we've run one webinar on ambient loop versus fourth generation networks. And our more recent one was about chemical-free versus chemical treatment in district heating networks. Benefit number 7, we have in-person events. We've been here with the Heat Network Zone for the last 2-3 years. We also have a national conference that we host, and we're planning later on this year to host the UK's first Heat Networks Expo in central London with over 400 delegates and 50 exhibitors. So please do note that. Number 8, we've got the training register on our website. If you need some training, please do go to our website and download that. 25 of our members offer 100 training courses. Most are free, some you have to pay a fee. Number 9, the jobs board. If you're a member, you can advertise on the jobs board for free. We don't guarantee to fill every job, but it's another way of getting your vacancies out there to the world. We've also got a podcast channel. We put our first podcast up on that, and we'll be putting more up on as we move through 2024. And then we've got the awards. Our first awards were in 2023 at our conference at Alexandra Palace, where a number of very prominent rising stars, really good companies, innovators won a number of awards. And then finally, it doesn't cost a fortune. If you want to join, please do become a member or come and talk to me after the show. So without further ado, I will now pass you on to John Allison. John is from the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero, and he's a Deputy Director for Heat Network. So thanks very much, John.
Right, thank you, Simon. And yeah, you got the name of the department right then. We are Department for Energy, Security and Net Zero. Really pleased to be here today to talk to you about our approach to growing the market for heat networks. I'm assuming that there'll be people here who are deep experts in all this and know a lot of the detail. Others may not. So we're going to start with quite a broad overview and allow some time for questions. I'm going to talk through briefly our overall approach to growing the heat network market. They're going to hand over to my colleague John to talk more about heat network zoning, and on to Richard from Ofgem to talk more about approach to consumer protection and regulation. First of all, the basics. What is a heat network? I won't repeat the detail on that. I suspect this is already very familiar to most people. But I think the important context here from a department's perspective is that we know we have a huge challenge to decarbonise around 30 million buildings in the UK, with some of the oldest housing stock in Europe. over 80% of those still relying on fossil fuel for heating. And to reach our net zero target by 2050, we need to decarbonise the way we heat and cool our homes and workplaces. When it comes to decarbonising heating, there are different options. We think a number of technologies each play different and important roles, including heat pumps, hydrogen, biogas, and of course heat networks. But we know there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and are looking at policies for each of those technologies in different circumstances. Heat networks provide around 3% of heat demand in the UK at the moment. We estimate this could rise to around 20% by 2050, which gives you a sense of the scale of opportunity and also the scale of the challenge. In dense urban areas, heat networks are often the lowest cost, low carbon source of heating. And while many are currently powered by gas, they can be converted to other heat sources in future. And this includes tapping into renewable and waste heat sources, as well as heat from rivers and redundant mines. And heat networks also deliver broader system benefits by offering the ability to run during times of low demand and benefit from lower carbon tariffs and reduce the investment needed into local energy grids. So the flexibility and adaptability offered by heat networks, as well as the decarbonisation benefits, are among the reasons why the department is so keen to support them. So we do need to deliver the scale of our ambition and get anywhere near that 20% by 2050 ambition. We know that we need to transform the market. And the biggest transformation will be heat network zoning. There'll be more to follow on this, but briefly, zoning is enabling us to identify the areas across England where heat networks should be the lowest cost, low carbon heating solution. It will then require certain buildings and heat sources within those zones to connect to a heat network within a prescribed timeline. And this will speed up developments, giving local authorities, developers and investors greater certainty about where to build. We also need to attract and enable private investment. We estimate we need something like 60 to 80 billion of investment into the sector in the coming years to achieve the growth trajectory that we want to see. We hope that the UK Infrastructure Bank will have an important role to play here. In their recent sector updates, they identified several areas where they may be able to help invest, including to reduce connection charges. We also know that we need to improve existing heat networks. We know that some networks are currently not providing a good enough service for consumers, and that's why we recently announced a further £45 million for the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme to extend that scheme out to 2028. This scheme provides grants for existing heat networks to improve operating efficiency and address consumer detriment. We're also working to improve outcomes through the new Heat Network Technical Assurance Scheme, which will drive up standards across the industry. And while transforming the market, we need to protect consumers. The Energy Act contained legislation for us to appoint Ofgem as the heat network regulator so that consumers get fairer pricing and better protections, and you'll hear more about this from Richard shortly. We also stepped in last year to support heat network customers and operators to deal with rising gas prices through the Energy Bills Discount Scheme. This scheme supported customers throughout the winter that's just ending to ensure that heat network customers are supported just as much as their neighbours with gas boilers. And we also need to build a pipeline. We need to see want to see new networks built in zones as quickly as possible. We're already working with a range of local authorities through the Advanced Zoning Programme to identify the best opportunities for large-scale heat networks that could begin construction as soon as 2025. And these projects really will bring to life the scale of our ambition. One example is Swan, the South Westminster Area Network, which will connect up existing heat networks and tap into renewable heat sources to deliver one of the biggest heat networks in the country. And we recently published a public information notice setting out full details of this opportunity. And it's also why investment schemes like the Green Heat Network Fund are so important. We've already confirmed funding of 188 million for Green Heat Network Fund projects, with more announcements to come. And we were able to announce last year a total of 465 million additional funding to extend the GHNF out to 2028. This means we can support projects such as the Langarth Deep Geothermal Heat Network in Cornwall, which uses geothermal energy to heat nearly 4,000 homes, or the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation in West London, we were the first scheme to recycle waste heat from large computer systems, storing internet data to supply heating. And these schemes build on the work of our heat network delivery unit, which provides earlier stage support for the pipeline of local projects and continues to play a very important role. So that hopefully gives you an overview of the department's approach to growing the market. As I mentioned, the single biggest transformation we're trying to effect is heat network zoning. Recently concluded our consultation. So I'll hand over to John, who's going to talk in more detail about that.
Thank you. Hello, good morning everyone. I'm also John and I'm also from DESNZ, but I'm going to speak to you, as this John has mentioned, about heat network zoning, which is, as you've heard, a key policy enabler. So essentially, heat network zoning will help identify those parts of England where heat networks are the best, most cost-effective low-carbon heating solution. That will give communities insights into their areas and where heat networks may be well located, and support the market in taking forward opportunities. As John mentioned, certain buildings within zones would be required to connect to heat networks where they're in a zone within a specified time frame, which will improve the commercialisation opportunities for the market, but also support those buildings in understanding the best approach they can take to decarbonising themselves. Together, this will help remove barriers that exist today and help the market grow towards the 20% figure that John mentioned. So there are a number of work strands involved in the zoning programme. Initially, we have powers in the Energy Act from last year to make regulations to implement zoning. And as John mentioned, we recently consulted on those proposals with a view to developing the regulations across 2024 so that the framework takes effect next year. We are, through those powers, establishing new roles and functions, both at local and central level. So local zoning coordinators can be established to coordinate activity in their areas and determine what the best approach is for building out networks in conjunction with private sector partners. And the central authority will be, initially we're proposing housed within DESNZ to help coordinate those local activities that are underway and provide oversight as the policy takes shape and gets off the ground. We've been working for a number of months now on a standardised methodology for understanding where zones may be located. So the map on the right of the screen is an initial output from a national zoning model that we've developed showing where zones may be located. There's more detailed maps on specific towns and cities in the UK DEA stand, so please do check them out after this event. We want there to be sufficient local activity and local engagement in making these zones a reality. So we're proposing that, having published a national map, individual local areas will be able to take steps themselves to refine them, working with local stakeholders as necessary, so that the zones that are subsequently designated are best for their areas. And we're also developing an online platform, a digital portal, where we hope most, if not all, of the information relating to zoning is available both to local government, individual consumers and the sector. I've mentioned the standardised model that identifies the zones themselves, and we're also proposing a number of routes to market, as we call them, recognising that individual towns and cities and the networks within them, there won't be a one-size-fits-all approach, and we want to provide a range of options and opportunities for the market and for local actors to take those opportunities forward. John mentioned the zoning pilot work that we're undertaking, so at a high level the plan is to get those projects off the ground and underway by the end of next year, and they'll be the first real-world examples of zones being developed. As I mentioned, we're proposing that a range of buildings may be required to connect where they're located within a zone, and given the nature of heat networks, there's really a range of buildings that could be well suited to using a heat network to provide their low carbon heating, hot water and cooling indeed. Equally, there's a number of heat sources that could be drawn upon to provide the heat to a heat network, moving away from gas CHP to recovering waste heat from other sectors to deliver heating in a cost-effective, low-carbon way. So I think I'll stop there and hand over to Ofgem, Richard, to provide the overview of the work they have underway.
Good morning, everybody. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you to UKDEA and Simon for inviting me and colleagues from DESNES to talk today. I'm going to give you a very high-level talk on our approach to regulation in the heat network sector, and to give you a sort of a flavour of what that might look like in the future. This is very much focused on consumer protection, as that's a key government policy to get that right for heat network customers going forward. So in late 2023, not 24 like it says on the slide, in late 2023, both Ofgem and DESNES had a joint consultation on our approach to consumer protection, and we intend to publish the response to that consultation in spring 24, probably sometime in April. As I say, it's a key priority for government to get this right, because if we're going to deliver a large percentage of heat generated by heat networks in the future, it's got to work for customers. The regulatory framework, with Ofgem as the regulator, will be underpinned by authorisation, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what authorisation might look like. So our policy is, at the moment, that's what we've consulted on, is to auto-authorise all existing heat network operators and suppliers, and these persons will be immediately bound by authorisation conditions at the point of go live of regulation. Within the authorisation conditions, there will be an obligation to register details of the heat network on Ofgem's new IT system during the initial 12 months of regulation. At the point a heat network operator or supplier is auto-authorised, Ofgem's enforcement powers are engaged, and we can take action if we see those persons not adhering to the terms of the authorisation conditions. The situation will be very different for new heat network suppliers and operators, and they will need to apply for authorisation again on Ofgem's IT system. Certain evidence will be required that they've got the ability to comply with authorisation conditions, and then Ofgem will decide whether to grant or refuse authorisation. And what I guess underpins the whole authorisation process is that it will be ultimately an offence to operate a heat network or supply heat without authorisation. So government and Ofgem have come up with two broad areas of activity that will need to be authorised. They are the supply of heat and the operation of a heat network. Each of those activities will be underpinned by a number of authorisation conditions, giving more detail as to what's expected. But broadly speaking, supply of heat is the person or organisation that has a contract with a final customer. And in the case of domestic customers, they'll have obligations relating to customer service, customer support, identifying and supporting vulnerable customers, and fair pricing and transparency of communication. And those will look a lot like the standards of conduct that we see in the gas and electricity sector at the moment, which broadly refers to treating customers fairly. And then there's the operation of heat networks. So this will be the person or organisation responsible for the day-to-day operation and maintenance of heat network and making sure there's a reliable supply of heat. And that will ultimately be bound by technical standards requirements. We do understand that in the majority of cases, the supply of heat and the operation of a heat network will be undertaken by the same person, but in some cases it's not. So that's the rationale for keeping those two activities separate. We're also aware that there is a huge variety of players in the heat network market, and as such, we're doing a piece of work at the moment looking at segmenting the market by looking at the capability of the people who run those heat networks. And Ofgem and government are considering how to do this and on what basis, and we will need to take a view as to whether this is achieved through principle-based rules coupled with guidance, or different rules based on the characteristics and capabilities of those running the heat network. Once regulatory framework is underway, there will be obligations on operators and suppliers of heat networks to provide Ofgem with periodic information that we request. In the initial period, some of this data will enable us to benchmark performance so that we can identify outliers in the future. And this is particularly applicable to pricing. So when we start monitoring pricing information, I think it will be difficult to say who's pricing fairly and who is not pricing fairly. But once we have a sort of a foundation of some data, then it will be easier for us to regulate this part of the market. Other key areas for us to look at are complaints data, and that will enable Ofgem to understand what areas of performance are impacting customers' outcomes and what's particularly important for customers as we go forward. And it will also enable us to look at that data, aggregate it, and see if there are particular problems in particular sectors of the market, so that then we can then proactively engage with particular sectors of the market and use our resource most effectively. Another key relationship for Ofgem is going to be with the Energy Ombudsman and consumer bodies such as Citizens Advice and Consumer Scotland. This has worked really well in the gas and electricity sector, where these organisations provide us with another strand of intelligence to understand what customers are saying about their experience as a heat network customer. So that will enable us to proactively engage where we see problems. And just to finish off, I guess, in the initial stages of regulatory go live, I've said consumer protection is going to be a clear priority for Ofgem and government, and these are particularly the things that we think are very, very important to us. Overarching is that customers receive a reliable source of heat at a fair price. Where customers are in a vulnerable situation, we very much expect that situation is taken into account in their dealings with a heat supplier. Broadly speaking, customers are treated fairly. The communication between those running the heat network and the customer is very clear and transparent, and enables customers to make informed decisions about their supply of heat. Bills need to be clear and accurate, and in particular there's going to be limits on back billing and recovery of undercharging from historic mistakes made by the supplier. When things go wrong, they need to be put right promptly, and when a complaint is made, it needs to be dealt with efficiently. And underpinning those 2 points are the ability for the customer to contact the heat supplier and know how to contact them, and that contact is easy and efficient. And finally, as you've seen, Ofgem is looking at disconnection of supply in the gas and electricity sector as well. But this must be an absolute last resort and only used when all other options have been exhausted. So there's just a little bit about how Ofgem is working with government to put in place a regulatory framework that's going to work for customers in the future. Happy to take any questions in the panel session afterwards. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Richard. We've now, thankfully, we've got 20 minutes for questions. So, gentlemen, if you'd like to take the hot seats, 2, 3 and 4, and there's a lady with a roving mic. We've already got a hand up, the lady in the red in the back row. If you would mind saying who you are and where you're from and who you'd like to address the question to, please.
Hello, Tamsin Lishman from Kenza, and actually I'd like to address this to all 3 panel members. How are you approaching this to ensure that there is the full range of solutions toolkit or options to allow the best solution for consumers in heat networks?
Okay, I'll pass it over to John in the first instance on the left. Yep, I think you're live.
Right, how's that? People can hear me now. So as a department, I think our approach overall is to make sure that we are supporting the most appropriate technology for decarbonisation in different circumstances. And on heat networks, the critical thing here is that the zoning model gives us the ability to establish where heat networks should be the most cost-effective, low-carbon solution. So we know that that won't be the case in all areas of the country, but in certain areas, particularly high-density urban areas, we think that heat networks will be the most appropriate solution for most buildings. In the consultation, we talk about certain circumstances where that may not be the case. There will be specific exemptions for buildings that would not realise the same benefits. But zoning policy and the zoning model is the tool we have to establish where heat networks will be the primary means of decarbonisation. For other technologies, there's a range of other support. Obviously, heat pumps through the boiler upgrade scheme, for example. Our hydrogen programme continues as well. But I think within heat networks, zoning policy is the key tool to make sure that we identify the areas where that technology will be the most appropriate solution, and then where appropriate, buildings are required to connect. I don't know if, John, you want to add anything more about the approach in the zoning condoc on that? Or?
Yeah, so just to add to that, the Energy Act powers ensure that, we hope they ensure at least, that all types of heat networks are captured by the regulatory framework. So that's fourth generation, fifth generation and ambient networks as well. And we're working with the players in the market to ensure that that's understood and that the opportunities from zoning are well understood as well. So as John says, it will be, the focus will be on large-scale district systems, but we don't want that to kind of crowd out other technology solutions that may play a role and may be able to play a cost-effective, low-carbon role for other consumers within the zones.
Thank you. My thoughts from an Ofgem point of view, this relates very much to our segmentation work. So we're looking across the sort of technologies and characteristics and business models under which heat networks work, and that piece of work is being undertaken at the moment. But that ultimately will inform the best approach to regulation when we reach regulatory go live. So it may be that we take a slightly different approach to, say, not-for-profit heat networks, or in your case, the sort of shared ground loop approach may need a slightly different approach to regulation. So we've very much got that in our sights and part of our policy development at the moment.
Gentleman in the front row, thanks very much.
Thank you. Joshua Stein from Construction News. I wanted to ask, particularly the two members of people who work for the government, about the Future Home Standard, because we've covered how some people think it doesn't go far enough, and actually could mean that the standard of homes, the green standard of homes, actually drops, and they've called for another consultation on that, and just wondered if the government would consider moving forward with that. Thank you.
Apparently. I'll give you back that one.
I don't want to duck the question, but I think I don't think we are able to really comment on that from our department's point of view. So I think we're aware of the importance of the Future Home Standard. Certainly see it playing an important role in driving up standards of those buildings, but not familiar with the details of those concerns on the consultation.
Thanks. There was the chap in the back row was first, to be fair. If you don't mind introducing who you are and where you're from and who's the question to, please.
Yeah, to the Johns, my name is Lars from SAV. The UK is a very urban country, and the gas grid covers like 75% because of that. So it's curious that we're saying only 20% for heat networks. You would almost sort of say wherever there was feasible to do gas, you would have thought you could do. So the discrepancy between 20 and 70%, that's a big number. Just reflections on that?
So I think that comes down to the difference between zoning policy, which is identifying areas where there's clear evidence that heat networks should be the most cost-effective low-carbon solution, and circumstances where there may be outside zones where heat networks would still be built out and could still offer potential as well. But for zoning, because we are regulating, it's really important that we have evidence that where we are asking and requiring buildings to connect, that in those areas we're confident that that will be the right solution for those buildings. That doesn't mean that we're saying that only in those zones can heat networks offer potential, but it does mean that it's in those areas where, based on the latest information we have, we are confident in saying that we can have a fixed requirement for buildings to connect, knowing that that will be the most effective low-carbon solution for that building type. We'll continue to update and iterate the model, I'm sure. I think there are some examples over there of some of the model outputs, some maps that people can look at to show the evidence we have so far. When those are designated, we'll be looking again at those zone boundaries. So right now the modelling work is ongoing. There will be opportunities for local areas to refine those zones before designating. And we'll also look after designation and making sure that we are updating where necessary our modelling of where zoning is the right solution with the most recent data. But I think that's the key point for me, is making sure that where we're having regulation in place and having those firm requirements, that we can be confident with evidence that heat networks are the optimal solution.
Right, down in the front row, there's three. Please introduce who you are and where you're from.
Hi there. I'm William Orchard, and I've led the energy policy work in a series of countries, if you like, for heat networks, normally wearing the hat of A.A. Ricardo or someone else. The optimal heat network in the world that I have seen, and I've seen a lot, is in the city of Odense in Denmark. And the beauty of that system is that they realized the key to the heat network was to minimize the cost of the financing of the whole of the network. And if you look at that, then a very attractive structure is to bond finance the whole of the network. Because what you're doing is putting in a system where a whole city will be connected. Currently, your model of a mini monopolies, in my opinion, is doomed to failure. So I'd merely ask you to go and look at the city of Odense, go and look at the model, go and look at the combined heat and power plant, which is a huge electric heat plant. It has a coefficient of performance of over 10. They started and heated the whole city by just starting anywhere with a boiler.
Brilliant.
They went, and I'm nearly finished, they went, and if sufficient people in the row wished to connect, they supplied them with heat. And go and see it, follow its model, and you will heat the whole city, not just a few buildings in the middle.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. I'll take that one back. Okay, so I think the question broadly was about using bond finance to fund much larger area networks and cross cities.
Thank you. That sounds like a great tip, and yeah, we certainly would like to visit that network. I think some of my colleagues have probably already seen it, actually. I think just some brief points. I think on financing models, we are very interested in ideas around how we can, particularly with our colleagues in the UK Infrastructure Bank, look at different models of funding in future. So we have, at the moment, the Green Heat Network Fund is working really well to provide grant finance for projects, but we are looking at how we can get the right mix of public and private finance and bring in more private investment in different ways. So very open to ideas and suggestions and other models around that. Just the other observation to make around, again, the potential for connecting more and more buildings in the city and people opting in. We absolutely want to see that. We want people who are not subject to the zoning regulation still to be able to opt in and connect to networks, and are looking as part of our consultation around different incentives around that. But I agree that I think the potential of zoning at its greatest will be if we can have a model where, as well as the buildings where we are regulating and requiring those connections, we have an offer that ultimately people see positively and want to tap into. So we're really keen to see how we can make that work and what finances are needed to make that model stack up.
Thanks very much indeed, John. Over in the front, if you don't mind introducing who you are, where you're from, and your question, and who is it to?
To the two Johns. So I'm John Moore from, I'm working with the South East Net Zero Hub, administering the Community Energy Fund. We've got a lot of communities who are interested in heat networks as a solution. So we've got quite a lot of that being developed at early stages. Once the zoning is in place and operating, is there any risk to those projects that Green Heat Network funding will be preferentially applied to heat zones?
So I think when we look at the rollout of zoning, we are working with certain areas at the moment that we think are at the forefront of large-scale network development. And through things like the Advanced Zoning Programme, we have got a strong focus on how can we see the rapid development of really large-scale networks to realise the opportunity of zoning. We think that is really important to demonstrate the scale of the opportunity, build that momentum in the market, and help to bring in some of the wider sources of investment that we know are needed. We absolutely see a potential for network development in areas that may not be in zones initially or potentially may not be at all. I think one of the longer-term questions for us when we look at the future of support once zoning beds down is, again, what are the different financial models that we may need to provide support for different types of networks? So I think that's an open question at the moment, to be quite honest. But at the moment, we have, again, the GHNF is open, taking applications from all areas, and there's certainly no restrictions at the moment around that funding, depending on zone potential or not.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Another question?
Hi everyone. My name's Joel Hamilton. I work for Hermetica Black, formerly a colleague of all of you. I was wondering if you could shed some light into the principles around fairness and fairness for pricing at the moment. That's something we're hearing quite a lot from some of our clients around just understanding what's coming and whether that's based on a counterfactual or based on operational performance. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Is that directed to all three, or whoever would like to talk about pricing and fairness and counterfactuals? Go on, Richard.
Hi, thanks for the question. It is an active area of consideration at the moment, and we've had at Ofgem, we've had a piece of work done by Carbon Trust to engage with the industry and understand the various components of in the cost base of running a heat network that make their way into the final cost that's charged to a customer. So any approach we take will be based on understanding how those costs are passed on and identifying where we think that is fair or not fair, i.e. someone taking a massive profit rather than someone taking a reasonable profit. But that's the work that's been undertaken at the moment, but work continues in that space to make sure we understand how to identify fair and unfair prices in the future.
So it's based on the actual operation of the network rather than the alternative that
I think everything is still on the table at the moment. So yes, counterfactual is one approach, benchmarking is another approach. Yes. Well, that work in progress at the moment.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Any other questions from anybody? Oh, there's a gentleman in a white shirt in the back row, but coming forward.
Hello, Marco from Meterpoint. We are a metering infrastructure provider, so your eyes, ears on what the network's doing, and the information on which contracts are settled is provided by companies like us on Heat Networks. I have a question on disconnection. Question for Ofgem, sorry. You've said disconnection is a last resort. There are two very different types of supply in heat networks. One is credit billing, where you are connected unless you don't pay. The other is prepayment, where you're not allowed to do a thing unless you've paid in advance. And those are two legally separate types of contracts. What do you mean when you say disconnection is a last resort in respect of heat networks? Are you suggesting that credit-billed customers should not be disconnected unless it's a last resort? Or are you suggesting that prepayment solutions should not be installed unless it's a last resort? Something on that would be useful for us.
So both of those elements, if I'm honest. So in the credit case, yes, I think every opportunity has got to be explored before you go down the disconnection route. In terms of prepayment and installing a prepayment solution, I think that's got to be done with due care, like it is like it should be done in the gas and electricity sector, where an assessment of the customer's situation is undertaken before a PPM is installed to make sure that it's not going to cause undue harm to those in a vulnerable situation.
If I could add to that a little, so we as the industry could reasonably expect, if there is a credit billing solution in place, that will remain standard. Ofgem are not expected to mandate prepayment capable solutions everywhere by default. This is expected to be fitted as a last resort.
I mean, I can't give you absolute comfort because policy is still under development, but I would see the sort of approach we're taking in gas and electricity to be sort of reflected in heat networks as we go forward. It'd be unlikely to diverge significantly.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you don't mind saying who you are and where you're from, please.
Hello. Oliver Reuter from something which is called the Foundation for Immersion Cooling in Data Centers. So we're setting this up with a company called Carbon Z. Now, my question to you is, there is a policy framework currently specifying 20% of data center energy to be reused by the 1st of July 2028. Now, what are we doing in terms of adapting data centers? Is 20% enough? Are you aware of this policy? And what is your view on energy recovery, not only heat recovery from data centers?
So personally, I'm not aware of that policy, but thank you for informing me of it. We can certainly look into it. From a zoning perspective, we have powers in the Energy Act in relation to potential heat sources and the role they can play to provide heat to heat networks within zones, and the consultation set out proposals around whether certain types of heat source should be required to provide that waste heat or not, and what the sort of process should be undertaken between heat network developers on one hand and the owner of the waste heat source on the other. So I think we're probably looking at it more from the recovering of waste heat rather than energy recovery per se. But again, interested to hear more about that, if there's opportunities there that we should be aware of to help further drive take-up of low carbon energy generally.
Brilliant, thanks very much indeed. Sorry, was there a question in the front? Yeah, gentlemen, I think we're on our last question now and then we'll be wrapping up. So there's just one in the front.
Thank you. Me again. I was going to ask, you talked a bit about private investment, UK Infrastructure Bank. Just wondered if you could elaborate a bit on what you're doing to engage with the private sector, how far you've got to kind of develop those relationships in this space to build those links and that investment. Thank you.
Sure. I think I'd probably summarise that as some really good progress, but a lot more to do. I think in the market generally, we've seen some movements of institutional investors into the UK market already, backing particular developers, which is obviously a really encouraging move and the sort of thing we need to hope to see more of. UK Infrastructure Bank, we work very closely with them, looking at the details of specific projects, helping them understand the investment potential. I know there are some conversations already happening between UKIB and developers about specific projects where the funding model that we're looking at might fit their investment model. We think it has a lot of potential. But I think more generally, it kind of comes back to this theme around needing to build momentum and excitement in the market. One reason why we really want to see these exemplars of large-scale networks getting into construction quickly in potential zones is to be able to demonstrate that this is a model that can work at scale in the UK and can hopefully make visible the opportunity to a broader class of investors that the UK growth we expect to see offers. So we are looking as a department across many sectors at how to build and strengthen those links with investors in UK green industries. But I think we all have more to do to talk up and market the opportunity that heat networks in the UK offer and start to show that on the ground through these really large-scale, exciting projects starting to happen.
Lovely, thanks very much indeed. I think that draws to a close this particular session. I'd like you to put your hands together for the two Johns and the Richard, please. Thank you very much. And I was an interesting reflection. I know that it's been a slight drop-off during the talk, but when we did these 2 or 3 years ago, these were about half full. So I think the fact that we've got the full and there's people at back standing shows that heat networks are really taking off. If you'd like to find out more, the Heat Network Zone is just behind you over there. We've got tea and coffee. Please come along, have a chat with the two Johns and Richard. Thanks very much indeed. And just before you get up and leave, our member Kenza would just like to do a quick bit of unveiling, so I'll pass you over to Kenza. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gents. If I can just have your attention just for a couple more minutes, if that's all right, please. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's David Billingsley. I'm the sales director at Kenza Heat Pumps. And over on our stand, just behind you, directly behind you, we are about to launch a new product, which will be a major unit that will play into heat networks and networked heat pumps. So if I could encourage you just to head over to our stand, we're about to sort of launch that product now. Our CEO Tamsin is over there, and she wants to give us a little bit of spiel on it. So yeah, if I could encourage you guys to go over, that would be great. Thank you very much.